What's going on, guys? It's Upside Down, aka Moise, back here with another video. Today's video is a really special video. As you can see by the length of it, I believe it's going to be at least 15 minutes or more, or even 20 minutes and more. And basically it's an interview that I conducted with this fellow named Moeed. And basically Moeed got a 45 out of 45 on his IB, which is really exceptional. And some days ago I was on Reddit and I saw Moeed doing an AMA and Ask Me Anything. And basically he was answering people's questions from the community on different tips such as how to manage the workload, motivation, what subject you choose, and yeah, stuff like that. So I thought it'd be really cool if I invited him onto my channel and actually did an interview with him and shared it with you guys, because I know a lot of you are either pre-IB or still in like grade 9 or grade 10, or you're in your second year IB and you just need a little more motivation, a little more tips. And these tips that he gave are something that I could never give. I mean, he's gone through the whole IB process. He's achieved exceptional like grades in the IB program, and the tips he gives, guys, are really good. His motivation is some of the best motivation I've heard throughout my IB. Now, I understand this video is really long. It's around 30 minutes, so it's kind of like a podcast basically. But if you aren't gonna watch the all 30 minutes, there's gonna be timestamps in the description below, which are gonna be for when I ask different questions. So all the questions are gonna be down in the description below. So here for a specific question, go down to the description below and click on that timestamp. Now, if you don't want to watch all of it, which I do recommend you watch all of it because it's a really interesting interview, and Moeed says some really exceptional stuff, and he's a really smart guy. So it's really interesting actually to listen to him. But if you don't want to watch the whole thing, I recommend watching the motivation section, which you can find in the description below. Click on the timestamp and it'll take you to that point. I recommend you watch that because really you can't find that type of motivation on the internet. He talks reality. He doesn't talk about this other stuff like, oh, you can do it, work hard. He talks about like the reality and how you need to set goals and work on those goals to achieve good marks in IB. So if you're not going to watch anything, or if you're not going to watch the whole thing, at least watch the motivation stuff because that's exceptional. But I do recommend you watch the whole interview. It is really good. Alright, just a side note before we start the interview, my mic quality was really low on this interview because I was using a different mic than I use on my regular videos, and also it seems that I'm not responding or saying stuff back to Moeed, or it seems that I'm not listening, but I am. I was just taking notes while Moeed was speaking because Moeed said some really nice things that were motivation to me too, and tips that I could take because I haven't done my full IB yet. So anything he says is beneficial to me just like it's beneficial to you. And another side note is that after some minutes, you'll notice that the audio cuts out. This is because the software that I was using, the audio software to record Skype, it would cut off after every 5 minutes. So I have to restart the software, and this is because it was a free trial of the version, not the full trial. So just bear that in mind, and when it does cut the audio, I'll just leave a note on the screen that says the audio has been cut. And yeah, anyways guys, that's all, and yeah, let's get right into the interview. So the first question that I'd like to ask you is basically, why did you choose the IB program? Was it like, what was the motivation behind it?
Right, so basically when I changed countries before I attempted this part of my academic career. So I had basically two choices. There were two private institutions in the city. One was British, the other was American, and the British institution basically offered C, as I had done GCE O-levels before then. But then, the American school was a purpose-built campus. They had much better facilities. And I also believed that this way I could take further maths if I enrolled in IB, as I hadn't taken the prerequisites back in O-levels, but I was willing to study it over the summer. So that's pretty much why I enrolled at the American school. So yeah. So, and since the only program they had was IB, so in I went.
Yeah. The only reason I enrolled into IB because all of my school did was IB. There was no extra thing. So, and there's only there's only one school that's near me, so that's why. All right. So, what classes did you take, and were there any reasons behind taking those classes, or was it just what your school offered?
Okay, so one of the things that I had to go up against immediately is that I quickly found out that my school didn't actually give me further maths. So I was trying to push myself during this part of my academic career, and this is why I knew some of my classes beforehand, because even if I went into A-levels, I pretty much would have taken the same subjects, as I was really interested in engineering. So, I had physics higher level, I had maths higher level, and chemistry higher level. And in the future, I planned on going into business, probably an MBA. which is
Uh-huh.
why I took economics higher level as well. And for my languages, I took language and literature, basically because I didn't like poetry that much. And if I
Uh-huh.
took literature, that would have put me into touch with poetry, even in SL. And for my second language, like my foreign language, I took Spanish. I
Yeah.
thought it would be an easier course because honestly, I wasn't that into learning a new language again.
Uh-huh.
So that's why I put Spanish ad initio. I didn't have any prior experience with either Spanish or French. So that's why. One
Okay.
of the things, though, that I found is that at my school, they didn't actually allow you to take three higher levels, like more than three higher levels.
Yeah.
So I had to actually push a lot to have a fourth higher level on my diploma for
Oh, yeah. Four.
economics.
Okay.
And I found that was really beneficial
Okay.
towards
Yeah.
the end.
Yeah. I only have three high levels as well. Or yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The thing is that with econ, it's actually easier to
Mm-hmm.
have higher level econ than standard level economics simply because the extra theory you cover is very minimal. And if you're good at
Mm-hmm.
math, you get this additional paper 3, which
Okay.
is which just gives you a boost, which just boosts your grades if you can do linear equations and whatnot. So it's an
Yeah.
easy way to get a 7.
Okay. That's a pretty good tip.
Yeah.
All right. So, if you just want to talk class by class, or if you just want to go over some classes that you want to give specific tips into, um, maybe you can talk about IAs or how to manage the specific workload in those classes. You should just go like any class that you choose.
Okay. So, well, I guess based on my AMA, I guess like a lot of people were really interested in math.
Yeah.
And I guess that's understandable because math is perceived to be one of the harder higher levels to take.
Yeah.
So I had a bit of a problem with math since when for most of my subjects, because I had taken O levels, I've generally found that pre-IB courses don't give you that extensive of a preparation. They're
Okay.
generally they're generally quite holistic, and you'll often find that a student who's gone through, let's say, the British system and IGCSEs or GCEs is
Mm-hmm.
far better equipped to take on the IB workload than a student who has actually gone through pre-IB. So in
Right.
some of my subjects, I did start off with an edge in terms of the syllabus topics that I had covered. But when it came to math, I was a bit
Yeah.
hamstrung uh, because the IB syllabus really focuses a lot on certain topics like functions and calculus. And these weren't that big of a focus in my GCE level. So there was a lot of adaptation. I was lucky that my math teacher, he was actually the deputy chief examiner for IB worldwide.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So yeah, the guy was really, really skilled. He was insanely good at math. But the best thing that he actually provided within class was his handouts. Like
Okay.
his handouts actually had previous IB questions, and they were sorted by topic. So he'd often give us a handout with questions from, let's say, which he picked up from the last 15 years. And, these are the questions that you can do. Of course, he didn't give all of them to us because, he still had to test us on
Yeah.
something. Honors math course or an extended math course back in grade 10. When you come to grade 11, the jump is pretty significant. In fact, we had like 18 students at the
Uh-huh.
start of math higher level, and 7 of them dropped after the first day because he gave us a surprise quiz, and nearly all of us failed except for one person in the entire class. So it
Oh,
was pretty hard. Yeah.
yeah.
But what he did, though, is that when you raise the bar so high and everybody works to
Mm-hmm.
get their, up to par, then you'd find that once you've adapted yourselves to the rigor, to the standard of IB past paper questions, then the actual exam becomes that much easier for you. Of course, it really is your choice whether you go through all the practice and you're willing to put in that sort of work. But in math, I did find that it was extensive past paper practice, learning from my mistakes. It's not sufficient just to look at an answer or a mark scheme for a question and think that you've got it, because
Okay.
you haven't actually got it until you're able to do the question later on. So one of the
Mm.
things I did is that oftentimes when I found that, okay, I made a mistake in a question, I'd come back to it later on and see whether I can solve it again. And though
Yeah.
this may seem a bit redundant for certain questions, you'll find that it's often the case that the IB tests similar patterns in terms of questions. Not in all the questions, but in some of them they do. And any edge that you can get on the exam is really useful. So sticking to good, solid past paper practice material was something that I believe was the factor in
Hmm.
getting a 7 in maths towards the end.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty
Yeah,
good because I it's summer right now here too. I'm going to year two, and I've been doing a lot of like past paper studying, especially for biology. And
yeah,
yeah, I'm going into math next year, so I'll keep that in like in my mind.
yeah.
All right, so if you just want to talk about how did your life look like when you went to home? What did you do at like how was your schedule with homework? Did you have a fixed schedule? Was it just like whenever you had time? How did that look?
Okay, so one of the things I did is when I came to the school, I actually met school's like the student government's vice president,
Okay.
and she was the one who actually made me realize that if I didn't actually push for my fourth higher level in the start of the school year,
Uh-huh.
like my school was never going to let me take it because they're a bit lenient, I guess, when it comes to academics, and that's
Uh-huh.
basically because you have this balance, and my school basically tries to be really inclusive, and in the process of doing so, they often discourage competition. They often discourage students from aspiring towards high academics because just
Hmm.
completing the IB program is considered to be a really big deal here. So that was something that I had to go up against. But I actually looked up a couple of students, the high performance students that I had heard of, and
Yeah.
I checked out their Facebook profiles, and I found that they didn't actually post that often. Like their
Hmm.
activity was really sparse.
Yeah.
So it made me realize that within IB, time is going to be really limited. But like I said, because I had this edge as I went into IB from my GCE O levels, I was able to balance time really well. I had time for multiple extracurriculars. I think more so than I guess anyone at my
Okay.
school, because I could balance academics as well. I already had an edge in terms of the syllabus content that was covered. And
Okay.
usually, what would happen is that after CAS activities, I was either doing weightlifting, or I was in the Amnesty wing at our school, or in Roots Institutes, which was like an environmental group that we had.
Okay.
And I did a lot of debate as well because I had been doing MUNs a lot back
Oh yeah,
in
we
my
have that at our
country.
school. It's pretty
Yeah,
cool. Yeah.
so I'd been doing a lot of MUNs, and so I went into the school's debate team.
Hmm.
So each season, I was in basically a different activity. And it may seem like you don't have sufficient time to pursue other interests,
Hmm.
but for most of grade 11 at least, I found that I was able to take weekends off and spend time gaming even if I wanted to. I
Yeah.
guess when I really had nothing to do, if I managed my time well and I did my assignments on time, um, it's a tendency for us to actually work when the deadline's right around the corner, and that's something that I learned to avoid unless you're really sure that you can pull off a solid assignment by that time.
Hmm.
Oftentimes you'll find that once you actually get down to the task of writing up an essay or doing an analysis or whatever, it takes more time than you think to produce a quality piece of work. And that's why it's better to actually get some of the work done beforehand so you have an idea of when.
A little bit about the essay in your previous question, but what subject you choose for your EE? How'd you go about writing that? Any tips you want to give on that?
All right, so my extended essay was in chemistry, and that was pretty much my strongest subject, at least by the time I was choosing
Yeah.
my subject for my EE. So in chemistry, I actually did my essay actually dealt with analytical chemistry, which was a
Yeah.
branch of chemistry that isn't normally taught in high school. So one of the reasons I actually chose that is this is something that is beyond the scope of the IB syllabus, and
Okay.
that is why it's likely to get you a higher score when it shows up if your essay actually goes for external moderation. Some of the
Yep.
tips that I have to give, first of all, I know that a lot of schools actually subscribe to databases like JSTOR and different
Yeah.
databases for searching like all these journals. I've
Yep.
often found that while it looks fancy, more times than not, the scope of these journals and these databases is so beyond what you're going to do in a typical high school classroom
Yeah.
that it's better to just resort to something simpler like Google Scholar, unless you're really
Okay.
good, unless of course you've actually learned how to use proper binary commands for search in a database. In that
Hmm.
case, you're able to get a really specific set of results on JSTOR, etc., and that really helps. Other than that, what I would recommend is talking really, really often with your supervisor. See, I believe that since the IB itself is such a teacher-centric program,
Yeah.
in that they, like, even for the syllabi you have this many hours needs to go for this subject, and your teacher needs to sign off on your IA, and your teacher needs to look at your extended essay. So you
Yeah.
need to talk a lot with your supervisor, make sure they actually agree and they see the direction that you're taking the extended essay in. There are two reasons for this. Firstly, they're probably going to be the same person who, like, if your school does internal predicted grades for your extended essay, your
Yeah.
supervisor is probably going to be one of the people who will actually have a look at your extended essay and give you a grade for it, which then gets internally moderated within the school. So at least they will be able to understand what you've done within your essay, and to a large degree, because a portion of the essay is actually holistic, they can
Yeah.
actually look at your motivation and write a positive note about you when it actually comes to sending off the final extended essay report. And the second reason for this is that your supervisors have more in-depth knowledge of the subject, and they've probably been through IB themselves. So if they see the your EE going in a direction which is not really feasible in terms of word count, in terms of length, in terms of the amount of uh, effort you have to actually invest for a certain result,
Yeah.
then they can actually let you know about that much earlier on. And I guess my third tip would be that when it comes to doing an essay within chemistry, one of the
Hmm.
things you want to do is make sure that you have a really, really strong bibliography. And what I mean by that is that your background and the initial framework of your extended essays, at least within the sciences, often have a lot of support in scientific theory. And even if you're not able to incorporate that within your actual essay, you might be able to include that, like, not in the meat of your essay, but perhaps in the background, as all the different things, like the factors that you've looked at before you actually settled on a specific topic or a specific method. For example, when I was doing an analytical chemistry, I was using one specific technique called Winkler titration for
Hmm.
the analysis of oxygen levels within water, and I was using a very specific adaptation of it, and I actually went into a lot of depth discussing why I chose this specific adaptation of
Yeah.
Winkler titration over all these others. And so I think when you're able to give that sort of discussion, it really adds to the value of your extended essay and shows that you've actually, thought outside of the box. I mean, anyone can follow a procedure that you find online, but it takes a lot of original thinking in terms of deciding what is the most suitable procedure or experimental setup for investigating whatever scenario you end up choosing. So that is really something that you should highlight if you've gone to that depth of research.
And I really enjoyed your EE question. I'm taking notes here as well. So yeah. Um, so for your like tips for any pre like I have a lot of friends that are going into IB this year, and yeah,
Okay.
they're in pre-IB right now. So any tips for them? They're in summer right now. Any summer tips that you guys give? Some productivity tips? Anything about that?
All right. So I guess one of the big things that I can touch upon is really when it comes to IB, it's motivation.
Yeah.
And when it comes to student motivation, I personally believe, and at least what I've seen in terms of the other students that I've interacted with at my school, external motivation, videos of Eric Thomas, videos of Zig Ziglar, videos of Les Brown, they're all good. They get you
Yeah.
pumped. You get a pep talk. At that moment, you feel like you can do anything. But if you really look at it, you can condense any single one of these motivational videos down to work hard and don't give up. Pretty
Yeah.
much. That sums up the essence of all of these motivational videos. And if you really want to succeed within IB, you can just cruise through IB, not care so much about everything, still pull off a passing grade and pass IB and get the diploma. You can do that, certainly. But if you
Yeah.
actually want to make the most of your time, you'll have to understand that since IB itself is very time consuming, especially if you're doing the full diploma, you'll have to understand that all the time that is being spent on gaining motivation from all these external sources could be spent on something else. There's an opportunity cost for it. So you could be spending it on actual education or on, taking more time off. So if you're intrinsically motivated, right? If you're intrinsically motivated, you're able to actually go into IB
Mm-hmm.
and have far more free time on your hands to use as you see fit. And the way I believe you can actually gain that motivation is to really look at it and understand what is the end goal here. For, I personally was really jaded when it came to IB at my school specifically because of certain policies that they mandated.
Yeah.
And a lot of other students felt the same way. However, you have to think this way, even if the program isn't exactly to your liking, like even if you didn't really have a choice between IB or some other program, what
Yeah.
you have to consider is that no matter how you put it, you are investing 2 years of your time into IB. Your name is attached to it. And so, therefore, it's ideal and it's beneficial for you if you can gain a productive result from it. And if you look at it that way, if you look at it as an investment of your time, all right, and whatever you get out of IB is the return on your investment, then you realize that you don't really have that much time to waste. And that's how you can actually value the time that you put into IB so much more. And that's how you can get results because you won't be slacking off. You won't be, skipping deadlines. You won't be asking for extensions. You won't be pursuing things that are not critical to achieving your goals through IB. It can be getting into an Ivy League university. For some of my friends, it was, and they did get in. It can be, just um, excelling within IB and, making your parents happy. Whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. The point is
Mm-hmm.
that there is some sort of goal that you have to attach to IB itself, and it's the pursuit of that goal, not just the accomplishment of the IB program itself. It's the pursuit of that goal which can then create intrinsic motivation for you to succeed. All right.
Yeah.
So that's one of the biggest tips that I have to give. And other than that, there's a very famous saying of my math teacher. He used to say that there are no holidays in IB, and I didn't actually understand that until I actually got to a first grade. And what a math teacher used to do is that he always told us that there's going to be homework, but he never actually gave us homework. And but when we thought about it, it's that since the difficulty of the topics that you actually broach scales up, the homework is actually you figuring out for yourself preemptively what you have to do. All right. Like, let's say
Uh-huh.
there's a really hard physics topic coming up. I know that a lot of students have problems with, say, electromagnetic induction, and students in math, some of them find counting difficult, some of them find induction difficult. So when you know that a hard topic is coming up, set aside time and work on it beforehand. Hammer out your weaknesses beforehand. So when the topic comes, you're good to go. You can, get results right there. You don't actually stumble. And this may seem like a lot of work, but honestly, if you really want to get results, the effort is worth it. It does get rewarded at the end. And my third tip, which I wish I had, which I wish someone had actually told me when I finished grade 11, is not university applications, but your internal assessments and your extended essays. The reason is
Yeah.
so. The reason is that when you're actually in your third semester IB, this is usually the time when most universities, you either have your early admissions deadlines showing up, you either have your UCAS deadlines, you have all this stuff showing up, a lot of different topics being released, and that's the prime time for you to be investing into your university applications. And even though your school may have a slightly different IA schedule, if it's anywhere in that time, you would want to be done with the bulk of your IAs and your extended essays beforehand, so that
Yeah.
you're able to focus on university admissions then. All right. And other than that, you would want to also focus on getting standardized testing like your SATs, your ACTs, or your SAT2s, your TOEFLs, done within grade 11. Like, don't leave it to grade 12. You really do not have time in semester 3. Semester 3 is the hardest semester within IB, and that's something that you should really be prepared for. So that's something to look out for. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that was I really enjoyed your motivation there. So anything I missed out, any tips you want to give, anything I didn't ask, that you want to tell the viewers, and this will just be like a wrap up to this interview.
Right. So if there's one thing that I'd like to give, it's going to be as follows. See, a lot of students, if you're actually looking into the IB diploma program, right? It's it's somewhat similar to my previous thought. It's about the notion of achievement. I used to have a lot of arguments with students within my grade about whether it was like, are you actually born smart, or do you actually learn to be good? All right, at anything. And this was a more meta discussion. And if
Uh-huh.
you look at it within the context of IB itself is the culmination of a rigorous high school program, and that really is it. University is going to, and college, are going to be far harder than IB currently is. And if you think about it that way, that if you're going to make it through university, obviously you'll have to develop even more advanced skills to do so. And if you look at it that way, IB itself is designed so that people of all these different backgrounds can actually excel within it. And it's not really so much about how whether a person is considered to be quote unquote smart, or a prodigy, or whatever these different labels get attached. It's really a question of how persistent you actually are when it comes to anything. And it doesn't really have to be IB. You can extend it to life as well. I mean, I remember that before I actually began IB, back when I was doing my GCE O levels in chemistry, I think around 3 or 4 months before the exam, my average was 53%, which was bad
Oh,
because I was
yeah.
probably going to fail. So it was really bad. And but part of the reason was that my teacher, basically didn't teach. And what usually happens is that when you have a teacher who's not that into teaching, and ours didn't teach at all, you're either going to resort to A, private tuition, or B, you're going to slack off. You're not going to do anything. The thing is, though, that I couldn't go for private tuition. I used to live really far away from school, but I actually sat down with a lot of the chemistry books and began this really intensive chemistry study routine over 2 weeks, where I went over the entire syllabus, did it from multiple books, and drilled my concepts, looked at different resources on the internet, just really went focused all in on chemistry. And by the time I actually got to my final exams, I actually ended up with a distinction in the entire city. So I'm not using that as an example to brag. What I'm trying to say is that it's really possible to have radical turnarounds in terms of your results, in terms of whatever you're trying to do, if you're willing to put in that kind of effort, right? I
Okay,
mean,
yeah.
I like, you could apply it to standardized testing, you could apply it to anything that you want to do. All right. I mean, my friend who just took the IB exams with me, he had a 2 on his mock exams for economics. He had a
Oh,
3 in physics. So he
yeah.
had failed in 2 of his higher level subjects. So he wasn't going to get the diploma. And that guy sat down, and for the last month, he focused in and he honed in on his weaknesses. And he ended up pulling off fives, I think, in both of them, which is a pretty significant improvement
Yes, it
considering that you
is.
were barely passing, that you weren't even passing. So that's something you always have to keep in mind. It's really about the persistence of the person. It's a fight within the dot and not the dot within the fight. That argument. That's really
Okay.
something that is key to success. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I really enjoyed this interview. Actually, you made a lot of really, really good points that you can't really find on the internet that much, especially on Reddit or any YouTube video. And I thank you for being on my YouTube channel and giving me this opportunity.
You're welcome.
Alright, so that wraps up the interview that I did with Moeed. And Moeed, if you're watching this, I thank you again for being on this channel, giving back to the IB community and the IB students. And if you guys like this video, please leave a like. And if you have any comments or concerns, leave them in the comment section below. I'll be making more IB videos in the future, so if you want to stay tuned to that, subscribe, and yeah, see you guys later.